The oil lamp flickers. Smoke hangs thick in the air, mixing with the smell of cheap wine, sweat, and something cooking in the back that might be pork. Might be something else. You don't ask. The man across from you slams his cup on the table. Dice scatter across the worn wood. He's lost again, and he's looking at you like it's your fault. Behind him, two men are arguing in a language you don't recognize. One of them has a knife. In the corner, a woman catches your eye. She works here. Everyone knows what that means. The prices are scratched into the wall behind her, right next to a crude drawing of the emperor with a donkey's head. Someone laughs too loud. Someone else tells them to shut up. A clay cup shatters against the floor. Welcome to a Roman tavern.
Thank you, good sir.
This is where soldiers drank away their pay, where gamblers lost everything, where politicians plotted and criminals hid, where ordinary Romans came to forget, for a few hours, how hard their lives actually were. The poet Juvenal described these places with disgust. He said you'd find them filled with assassins and sailors, thieves and runaway slaves, executioners and coffin makers, priests sprawled drunk on their backs. There, he wrote, it's freedom for all alike. Shared cups. No one gets a separate couch. No table set apart. He meant it as an insult. But maybe that was the whole point. Tonight, we're going inside. We'll see what they ate, and why it might have been slowly poisoning them. We'll meet the people who worked here, and discover the lives they led behind the counter. We'll read the graffiti they scratched into the walls. Insults, love notes, and jokes that still make sense 2,000 years later. We'll find out why the emperor tried to ban these places, and why he failed. Hello, and welcome back. If you're new here, this is where we explore the parts of history that don't make it into the textbooks. The messy parts, the human parts, the parts that remind us that people 2,000 years ago were, well, people. Tonight, we're stepping into the Roman tavern. Not the sanitized version you might have seen in movies. Not the cheerful inn with the friendly barkeeper and the roaring fire. The real thing. The places that respectable Romans pretended didn't exist, even as they snuck in through the back door after dark. These weren't restaurants. They weren't bars in the way we understand them. They were something else entirely. They were the living rooms of the poor, the offices of the criminal, the only hot meal a working man might eat all week. And they were everywhere. In Pompeii alone, a city of maybe 10,000 people, archaeologists have identified at least 120 of them. That's one tavern for every 80 people. Imagine a small town today with a bar on every corner. Now double it. The Romans who ran the empire didn't just tolerate these places. They needed them. They tried to control them. They repeatedly tried to shut them down. They never succeeded. So settle in. Find a comfortable spot. The night is long, and we have wine to drink and stories to tell. Let's begin where every Roman tavern began, with the door. Picture yourself walking down a street in ancient Rome. It's late afternoon. The sun is starting to set, painting the plaster walls in shades of orange and gold. You've been working since before dawn, hauling cargo at the docks, maybe, or mixing mortar at a construction site. Your back aches. Your throat is dry. And you don't have a kitchen at home. Most Romans didn't. If you lived in the city, you probably lived in an insula, an apartment building, sometimes 5 or 6 stories tall, made of wood and cheap brick. The ground floor had shops. The upper floors had apartments. Small apartments. Dark apartments. Apartments with no running water and absolutely no way to cook safely. Start a fire in one of those places and you might burn down the whole block. It happened all the time. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD? Some ancient sources claimed it started in a tavern near the Circus Maximus. So if you wanted hot food, you went out. And everywhere you looked, there they were. The popinae, the taberna, the thermopolium, different names, but all serving the same basic purpose. A place where a working man could get a hot meal and a cup of wine without burning down his apartment building. You spotted them by their architecture. Most had wide doorways opening directly onto the street, with no real separation between inside and outside. A counter ran along the front, usually L-shaped or U-shaped, made of brick or stone, often decorated with marble chips or colorful tiles. Set into the counter were large clay jars called dolia. These were the ancient version of a steam table. They kept food warm. They stored wine. They held whatever the owner was serving that day. Behind the counter, you might see shelves lined with amphorae, the clay jugs that held wine. A small brazier for cooking, hanging sausages, maybe a ham or two, curing in the smoky air. And on the walls? Pictures. Sometimes they showed the god Mercury, patron of commerce. Sometimes Bacchus, god of wine. Sometimes they showed the food on offer, eggs, olives, poultry, cheese. And sometimes they showed other things. We'll get to those. The people who ran Roman taverns were, by legal definition, disreputable. The word Romans used was infamous. Infamous. It was a legal category that stripped you of certain rights. You couldn't hold public office. You couldn't testify in court. You were permanently marked as someone respectable society looked down upon. Tavern keepers shared this status with actors, with gladiators, with prostitutes, with anyone who made their living entertaining the masses. The assumption was simple. If you served drinks for a living, you were probably involved in other things too. Gambling, prostitution, receiving stolen goods. The Roman elite couldn't imagine running such a place for any honest reason. And sometimes they were right. But often, running a tavern was simply a business, a way to survive. Many tavern keepers were freedmen, former slaves who had bought or been granted their freedom. They'd learned the trade while enslaved, working the counter for someone else, and when they finally gained their liberty, they knew only one way to make a living. Others were freedwomen. This is important, and we'll come back to it. But for now, understand this. In a society where women had few economic opportunities, running a tavern was one of the few ways a woman could own a business, make her own money, and survive without depending on a husband or father. The cost was her reputation. But for a former slave, reputation might have been a luxury she couldn't afford. Let's go in. You push past the open doorway. The transition is immediate. The street noise, the carts, the vendors, the endless shouting of Roman traffic fades to a murmur. The air changes. Cooler, smokier, thick with the smell of food and wine and bodies. The light changes too. Oil lamps hang from brackets on the walls, casting dancing shadows. In the corners, it's dim. The kind of dim where deals get made. Where hands touch under tables. Where a knife could come out and no one would see until it was too late. But you're not here for trouble. You're here for dinner. The counter is right in front of you, and behind it stands a woman. Let's call her Fortunata, a common name in Pompeii, often given to slaves. She might have been born with a different name, in a different place. Greece, maybe. Syria, Egypt, North Africa. The slave trade brought people from everywhere. Now she works the evening shift. What'll it be? You look at the dolia set into the counter. Each one holds something different. This one has chickpeas, simmered in garum, that fermented fish sauce the Romans put on everything. This one has lentil stew, thick and brown. This one has something with meat in it. Pork, probably. Maybe. You point. She ladles. The bowl she hands you is terracotta, well-worn, chipped at the edges. Thousands of hands have held this bowl before yours. A wooden spoon sticks out of the stew. Wine. Of course, wine. You didn't come here to drink water. Let's talk about Roman wine. Forget everything you know about wine today. Forget the careful vintages, the temperature-controlled cellars, the sommeliers swirling glasses and talking about tannins. Roman wine was different. At the high end, yes, there were fine wines. Falernian was legendary, aged for decades, drunk only by the wealthy, worth more per jug than a laborer earned in a month. Senators served it at dinner parties and poets wrote odes to its excellence. You would never taste Falernian. What you got at a tavern was something else entirely. The cheapest option was Laura. This was made by taking grape skins that had already been pressed twice, soaking them in water for a day, and pressing them a third time. The Roman agricultural writer Cato recommended Laura for slaves. It was barely wine at all, thin, sour, more like grape-flavored water with a slight buzz. Slightly better was Posca. This was sour wine mixed with water, wine that had already started turning to vinegar but hadn't quite gotten there yet. It was the standard drink of Roman soldiers, about a liter per day according to military regulations. It was refreshing, actually, full of vitamin C. The acidity killed bacteria in the water, which made it safer to drink than plain water from a Roman fountain. Remember when Jesus was offered a sponge soaked in vinegar on the cross? That was probably Posca. Not cruelty, just what Roman soldiers had on hand. At the tavern, what they served depended on what you could afford. A few bronze coins got you a cup of something wet and vaguely alcoholic. More coins got you something that actually tasted like wine. The most you could spend, still less than a day's wages for a laborer, got you something almost respectable. But here's the thing. Romans didn't drink wine straight. They mixed it with water. Sometimes hot water, sometimes cold. The ratio varied, but drinking undiluted wine was considered barbaric, something Germans and Gauls did, not civilized people. At the tavern, there was a small heater built into the counter, keeping water warm for exactly this purpose. You'd order your wine, and the server would mix it for you. Stronger if you wanted to forget. Weaker if you had to work in the morning. Some places got fancy. They'd add honey to make mulsum, a sweet aperitif. They'd add spices, pepper, coriander, saffron, to make conditum, a kind of ancient sangria. In winter, they'd heat the wine until it steamed. In summer, well, there's a famous inscription from a tavern, where the owner clearly had a sense of humor. Someone had written on the wall, "Would that you pay for all your tricks, innkeeper. You sell us water and keep the good wine for yourself." Watered down drinks. Some things never change. Now let's talk about the food. The stew in your bowl is hot. That's the important thing. It's hot, and it's filling, and you didn't have to cook it yourself. What's in it? Probably legumes. Lentils, chickpeas, fava beans, peas. These were the staples of the Roman diet, cheap and nutritious. The poor ate them constantly. Rich Romans wrote about how their virtuous ancestors had lived on simple legume stews before wealth corrupted the empire. The legumes are swimming in broth. Olive oil makes it rich. Garum makes it savory, that fish sauce again, adding a deep umami flavor that we'd recognize today from Thai or Vietnamese cooking. There's bread, of course. Flat bread, probably. Something to sop up the liquid. If you were lucky, if you had a few extra coins, there might be meat. In 2019, archaeologists excavating a remarkably well-preserved tavern in Pompeii found food still in the Dolia. 2,000 years old, preserved by the same volcanic ash that killed everyone who ate there. They found duck. They found pig. They found goat or sheep. They found fish. They found snails. All in the same container. The archaeologists weren't sure if this was one elaborate stew or several different dishes stored together. But it tells us something important. Tavern food wasn't simple. It wasn't just beans and bread. Real cooking happened here. Recipes that required multiple ingredients, careful preparation, real skill. The poet Horace called taverns greasy. He meant it as an insult. But think about what that means. The food had fat in it, substance, flavor. On a cold Roman night, after a long day of labor, that grease was a gift. Other sources mention sausages, grilled over coals. Eggs, always eggs, the fast food of the ancient world. Cheese, sometimes fresh, sometimes aged. Olives, of course. Pickled vegetables. Dried fruit. Small cakes and pastries, when the authorities allowed them. When the authorities allowed them. Yes, we need to talk about that. The emperors hated taverns. Not personally, perhaps. Some of them certainly snuck in for a drink when they thought no one was watching. But officially, taverns were a problem. They were gathering places, meeting spots, the kind of places where ordinary people talk to each other, unsupervised by their social betters. The kind of places where rumors started, where complaints became grievances, where grievances became plots. Emperor Tiberius, the grim, paranoid successor to Augustus, instructed the aediles, the officials who regulated commerce, to crack down. No more pastries, no more cooked meat, nothing but the simplest fare. It didn't work. Emperor Claudius, the stuttering scholar who unexpectedly became ruler of the known world, went further. He ordered taverns shut down entirely. They reopened as soon as he stopped paying attention. Emperor Nero, yes, that Nero, passed another round of restrictions. After the Great Fire of 64 AD, he banned the sale of all cooked food except vegetables and pulses. Only the plainest fare. Nothing festive. Nothing that might encourage people to linger. The taverns served vegetables and pulses. And then they served whatever else they had, underneath the vegetables, to anyone who knew to ask. Emperor Vespasian tried again. Only beans could be sold. The beans kept flowing. So did everything else. Why did these laws keep failing? Because the emperors were fighting something they couldn't defeat. Necessity. Tens of thousands of Romans had no way to cook for themselves. The city needed taverns the same way it needed bakeries and aqueducts. You could pass all the laws you wanted, but if a third of your population needed hot food and couldn't make it at home, they were going to find somewhere to buy it. And there was another reason, one the emperors eventually figured out. If they banned festive food from taverns, then the only time ordinary people could eat well was when the emperor himself provided it. Public banquets, festival distributions, bread and circuses. By limiting what taverns could sell, the emperors made themselves the only source of celebration for the common people. Whether intentional or not, the laws made the emperor a benefactor. The only benefactor. Control disguised as morality. As old as government itself. The clientele. Juvenal gave us that famous description of who you'd find in a Roman tavern. Assassins, sailors, thieves, runaway slaves, executioners, coffin makers, drunken priests. He was exaggerating, probably, but not entirely. Let's talk about who really filled these places. Laborers. These were the backbone of the tavern trade. Men who worked the docks, loading and unloading the ships that fed the empire. Men who built the buildings, mixed the concrete, hauled the stones. Men who carried rich people around the city in litters, human horses for those who could afford them. Men who collected trash, cleaned latrines, did all the work that kept a city of 1 million people functioning. They came to taverns because they had nowhere else to go. Their apartments were dark, cramped, shared with too many people. The tavern was warm. It had light. It had food. It had company. Soldiers. Off-duty legionaries and Praetorian guardsmen were regular customers. They had money, Roman soldiers were paid reasonably well, and they had habits acquired in years of military service. Drinking, gambling, looking for fights or trying to avoid them. The army actually issued posca as a ration, but that didn't mean soldiers didn't want something stronger when they could get it. Taverns near military camps did excellent business. Merchants and traders. Port cities like Ostia were full of men passing through. Sailors who'd been at sea for weeks, desperate for solid ground and hot food. Traders from Egypt, from Syria, from Gaul, from Spain. They brought foreign customs, foreign languages, foreign money. The tavern was neutral ground, a place where a Phoenician and a German could drink together without either being on home turf. Freedmen. Former slaves were a massive part of Roman society, perhaps a third of the urban population at some points. They occupied a strange middle ground, legally free but socially marked, often more successful than the freeborn poor but never quite accepted by respectable society. Taverns didn't care about your birth status. Your money was as good as anyone's. Women. We need to talk about women. Roman law had a specific provision, preserved in the legal codes. We hold that a woman openly practices prostitution, not only where she does so in a house of ill fame, but also if she is accustomed to do this in taverns, or in other places where she manifests no regard for her modesty. Read that carefully. A woman who worked in a tavern was legally presumed to be a prostitute. Simply by serving drinks, she lost her legal protection against charges of adultery. She was considered, in the eyes of the law, to have no modesty left to protect. This tells us something important about who worked in taverns, and what their lives were like. Many tavern workers were slaves. The owner, whether male or female, might own several enslaved women who worked the counter, served drinks, cleaned up, and did whatever else the customers were willing to pay for. These women had no choice in any of it. Their bodies were their owner's property. Some workers were freedwomen, former slaves who had gained their liberty but kept working in the trade they knew. The law still treated them as presumed prostitutes, but at least they kept their own earnings. At least they could, theoretically, walk away. And some were free women who had fallen into poverty. Widows without support. Women whose families had lost everything. Women who had no other options in an economy that offered few legitimate jobs to females. We know some of their names from the graffiti. Iris, a slave who worked at an inn. Two men, Successus and Severus, fought over her on the walls of her workplace. Successus the weaver loves the innkeeper's slave girl named Iris. She, however, does not love him. Still, he begs her to have pity on him. That was written by Severus, his rival. You're jealous, you're bursting. Don't tear down someone more handsome, a guy who could beat you up and who is good looking. That was Successus, responding. They went back and forth, insult after insult, all preserved on the wall of that Pompeian tavern. Iris herself never wrote anything. We don't know what she thought about these two men arguing over her like she was a prize to be won. Maybe she found it flattering. Maybe she found it exhausting. Maybe she just wanted them both to leave her alone. She was a slave. Her feelings weren't recorded. The barmaid's day. Let's imagine a day in Iris's life. She wakes before dawn. The tavern owner, let's call her Asalina, after a real tavern keeper in Pompeii, expects the place ready for the morning crowd. Iris sweeps the floor. She cleans the cups from the night before. She fills the dolia with fresh food, brought from the market or prepared in the small kitchen at the back. She lights the brazier. She makes sure there's enough wine. The first customers arrive with the sun. Working men who want something quick before their shift. Bread dipped in wine, maybe. A handful of chickpeas. Something to fill the belly. Iris serves them. She smiles when they make jokes. She ignores the comments about her body. She's heard them all before. Midday brings more customers. The crowd is different now, more varied, more rowdy. Someone wants food. Someone wants wine. Someone wants information. Who's hiring at the docks? Who owes money to whom? Whether the authorities are asking questions about anyone specific. Taverns were information exchanges. News traveled through them faster than through any official channel. If you wanted to know what was really happening in the city, you went to a tavern and listened. Afternoon is slower. The serious drinkers are settling in now, the ones who'll stay until dark. Iris knows them all. This one always orders the same thing. That one never pays until he's reminded. The one in the corner is trouble. He's lost at dice twice this week and is looking to take it out on someone. Evening is the dangerous time. The oil lamps are lit. The shadows grow longer. The crowd gets drunker. The noise gets louder. Somewhere in the room, dice are being thrown. Gambling is illegal, has been for centuries, but the law might as well be written in water for all the good it does. Everyone gambles. The distinctive sound of dice in a fritilis, the dice cup, is the soundtrack of every Roman tavern. A fresco from Pompeii shows what happens when gambling goes wrong. Two men at a table, arguing over the dice. "I won," says one. "It's not 3, it's 2, says the other. The next panel shows them fighting. The third panel shows the innkeeper throwing them both out. "If you want to fight, get outside." Iris has seen this play out 100 times. She knows to step back when the voices get loud. She knows which customers will protect her if things get ugly. She knows which ones will make things worse. And sometimes, often, there's the other part of her job. A customer catches her eye, makes the signal, names a price. What happens next depends on where she works. Some taverns had back rooms with beds. Some had arrangements with nearby brothels. Some simply had dark corners where quick transactions could take place. The money goes to Asalina, her owner. Most of it, anyway. Maybe Iris keeps a little for herself. Tavern workers were known to hide coins, saving up copper by copper toward a dream of freedom. The prices in Pompeii ranged from 2 asses to 16 or more, roughly the cost of 2 loaves of bread at the low end, a week's worth of cheap meals at the high end. A woman named Prima offered her services for 1 as. A woman named Attica charged 16. What made the difference? Youth, probably. Beauty, certainly. Specific skills, sometimes. The graffiti is explicit about what certain women offered, preserved on the walls for 2,000 years. Late at night, the tavern finally empties. Iris cleans up again. She banks the fires. She checks the locks. Tomorrow, she'll do it all over again. The owner's perspective. Asalina was a real person. Her tavern still stands in Pompeii, on the Via dell'Abbondanza, the street of abundance. The counters are intact. The dolia are still embedded in the masonry. The doorposts still bear traces of the signs that once advertised her business. We know her name because it was painted on the wall outside, in the red letters used for election notices. This is one of the strangest things about Asalina's tavern. A woman who ran a business associated with prostitution and gambling was publicly endorsing political candidates. Asalina asks you to vote for Gaius Julius Polybius for duovir. The duovirs were Pompeii's chief magistrates, the closest thing to mayors. And here was a tavern keeper, urging her customers and neighbors to vote for her preferred candidate. She wasn't alone. Several women from her tavern, Maria, Smyrna, Eagle, also had their names on election posters. Whether they were employees, slaves, or friends is unclear. What's clear is that they had influence. Their endorsement was worth something. Think about what that means. Yes, women couldn't vote in Rome. Yes, tavern workers were legally considered disreputable. Yes, the elite looked down on them as the lowest of the low. But in the neighborhood, on her street, Asalina had power. She knew everyone. She fed them. She served them drinks. She listened to their problems and watched their children grow up. When election time came, her word carried weight. The respectable senators in Rome might have sneered at the thought. A tavern keeper influencing elections? Outrageous. But Asalina knew something the senators didn't. Politics isn't just what happens in marble buildings. It's what happens on street corners, in shops, over cups of cheap wine at the end of a long day. It's conversations between people who trust each other because they've been neighbors for years. The tavern was Asalina's parliament. We can't pretend taverns were all warmth and community. They were also, undeniably, places where bad things happened. Some of this was petty crime. Theft was common. Watered wine was the least of the fraud you might encounter. Professional gamblers used weighted dice and marked knucklebones to fleece tourists and drunks. Pickpockets worked the crowds. Fences moved stolen goods. One graffiti from Pompeii reads, "A copper pot went missing from my shop. Anyone who returns it to me will be given 65 bronze coins. 20 more will be given for information leading to the capture of the thief." The shop in question was probably a tavern. The theft was probably an inside job. More serious crime lurked in the shadows too. Remember Juvenal's list? Assassins. That wasn't pure poetry. Taverns were where you went if you needed to hire someone for a dirty job. They were where you met if you were planning something the authorities wouldn't like. They were where secrets were sold. Emperor Claudius wasn't paranoid when he tried to shut them down. Or rather, he was paranoid, but he wasn't wrong. These were places where the collegia met. Collegia were associations, guilds, essentially, for various trades and interests. Some were legitimate organizations of craftsmen. Others were thinly disguised political organizations. A few were outright criminal enterprises. The authorities could never quite tell which was which. All of them met in taverns. A firefighting collegium might meet to organize their bucket brigades. A burial society might meet to collect dues and plan funerals. A group of Isis worshippers might gather to honor their goddess. A collection of men who happened to support the same political faction might discuss how to advance their interests. And somewhere in the back, other meetings might be happening. Meetings about prices that needed adjusting. People who needed persuading. Rivals who needed to disappear. The emperors saw conspiracy everywhere they looked because, sometimes, there was conspiracy to see. The walls that spoke. The graffiti of Pompeii. If you want to know what real Romans thought, forget the histories. Forget the speeches and the poetry and the official records. Read the walls. More than 11,000 pieces of graffiti have been catalogued from Pompeii alone. Scratched into plaster, painted in charcoal, carved with knife points. Ordinary people leaving their marks for anyone who cared to see. The taverns were covered in them. Some were advertisements. Palmyra, the thirst quencher. A nickname for a barmaid, or a boast about the wine. Either way, someone thought it worth recording. Some were reviews. Traveler, you eat bread in Pompeii, but you go to Nuceria to drink. At Nuceria, the drinking is better. The first Yelp review in history. Some were complaints. Would that you pay for all your tricks, innkeeper. You sell us water and keep the good wine for yourself. Another, the finances officer of Nero says this food is poison. Some were confessions. We have wet the bed, host. I confess we have done wrong. If you want to know why, there was no chamber pot. 1,000 years before hotel housekeeping complaints, people were making excuses for the same basic failures. And some were simply human. We two dear men, friends forever, were here. If you want to know our names, they are Gaius and Aulus. Two friends, commemorating their friendship. That's all. But something about it, the simple declaration, the insistence that their names be remembered, makes it feel more real than any emperor's triumphal inscription. Let's return to Iris for a moment. Or rather, to the men who wrote about her. We've already heard from Successus and Severus, the rivals fighting over her on the tavern walls. But they weren't unique. The walls of Pompeii are covered with declarations of love, lust, and heartbreak. If you are able, but not willing, why do you put off our joy and kindle hope and tell me always to come back tomorrow? So, force me to die since you force me to live without you. That's surprisingly eloquent for graffiti. Someone was genuinely suffering. Others are more direct. I screwed a lot of girls here. I screwed the barmaid. On June 15th, Hermeros screwed here with Philoterus and Caphasis. They included the date. They wanted it on the record. Some graffiti was more complicated. Restitutus says, "Restituta, take off your tunic, please, and show us your hairy privates." What are we supposed to make of this? A crude proposition? A joke between regulars? An attempt to embarrass someone? The frustrating thing about graffiti is that we can read the words but we can't hear the tone. Was this said with a leer, or a laugh, or the resigned exasperation of a barmaid who'd heard it all before? Sometimes the walls recorded conversations. A weaver named Severus wrote, "Successus the weaver is in love with the slave of the innkeeper, whose name is Iris. She doesn't care about him at all, but he asks that she take pity on him." Then Successus replied, "Envious one, why do you get in the way? Submit to a handsomer man and one who is being treated very wrongly." Then Severus again, "I said and wrote the truth. You love Iris, who doesn't care about you." A message board. A comment section. 2,000 years before the internet, Romans were having flame wars on tavern walls. Not all graffiti was about love. Gee, I hope your hemorrhoids rub together so much that they hurt worse than when they ever have before. That's specific. Samius to Cornelius, go hang yourself. That's direct. Epaphra, you are bald. That's just mean. The Romans loved a good insult, and the tavern walls preserved them all. Body shaming, accusations of sexual deviance, suggestions about parentage, everything we think of as modern internet toxicity existed in ancient Rome, just slower. Some insults were political. The emperors themselves weren't safe. That crude drawing of the emperor with a donkey's head we mentioned earlier, that was real. People mocked their rulers in the relative anonymity of the tavern wall, saying things that would have gotten them killed if said in the forum. Some insults were commercial. Rival businesses slandered each other. Disgruntled customers complained. Suppliers accused shopkeepers of fraud. And some insults were just the eternal complaints of human beings living in close quarters. I'm amazed, O wall, that you have not fallen in ruins, you who support the tediousness of so many writers. Someone got tired of all the graffiti and wrote graffiti about it. Philosophy and poetry. But it wasn't all crude jokes and insults. Sometimes the graffiti was beautiful. Lines from Virgil appeared on tavern walls, especially the opening of the Aeneid. "I sing of arms and the man." It was probably the most famous line in Latin literature, and Romans liked to show off that they knew it. The fact that ordinary tavern patrons could quote Virgil tells us something important. Literacy was more widespread than we sometimes assume. Not everyone could read, certainly, but enough people could that writing on walls was a meaningful form of communication. Some graffiti was philosophical. Nothing can last forever. The sun that once shone bright returns to ocean's depths. The moon that once was full wanes thin. Even the wind's fierce violence can turn to gentle breezes. That's someone thinking about impermanence, about the passage of time, about how everything ends. And they wrote it on a tavern wall in Pompeii, not knowing that Vesuvius would prove their point within a decade. Other graffiti was simply observant. Profit is joy. Everyone writes on the walls but me. A small problem gets larger if you ignore it. Practical wisdom, passed down anonymously, preserved by catastrophe. And sometimes, just sometimes, the graffiti was tender. Health to you, Victoria, and wherever you are may you sneeze sweetly. Romans believed that sneezing was lucky, a sign that the gods approved. This was a blessing. Someone wished Victoria well, wherever her travels took her, and hoped the gods would show her favor. We don't know who Victoria was. We don't know who wrote this message. But 2,000 years later, we know that someone cared enough to wish her well. That's worth something. Let's end where so many Roman tavern stories ended. In Pompeii, in the summer of 79 AD. The city had been shaking for days. Small earthquakes, nothing unusual. The whole region was seismically active. Everyone knew that. 17 years earlier, a major earthquake had badly damaged the city. They were still rebuilding. On August 24th, or possibly October 24th, depending on which evidence you trust, life continued as normal. The taverns opened. The wine was poured. The dice were thrown. The graffiti accumulated. Successus and Severus probably argued over Iris again. Asalina probably served her customers and lobbied for her political candidates. The coffin makers and the sailors and maybe even an assassin or two took their usual places at the counter. Around noon, Vesuvius exploded. Not with lava, not at first. The mountain shot a column of ash and pumice 20 miles into the air. The falling stones began pelting the city, small at first, then larger. The sky turned black. The air filled with sulfur. Many people fled immediately. Others stayed, hoping the worst would pass. The taverns stayed open. We know this because of what archaeologists found. Food still in the dolia. Coins scattered on counters. Games interrupted mid-play. In one tavern, they found a dog, still chained, unable to escape. The pumice fell for 18 hours. Buildings began to collapse under the weight. Those who stayed huddled in their houses, hoping the roofs would hold. Then came the pyroclastic surges. Superheated gas and ash, moving faster than anyone could run, incinerating everything in their path. 6 surges hit Pompeii between midnight and dawn. Anyone still alive after the first didn't survive the second. The taverns went silent. The ash buried the city to a depth of 20 feet. It filled every building, every room, every container. It preserved what it killed. When archaeologists began excavating in the 18th century, they found the taverns almost exactly as they had been left. The counters, the dolia, the cooking equipment, the frescoes on the walls, and the bodies. Giuseppe Fiorelli, who led the excavations in the 1860s, developed a technique for preserving the shapes of the dead. The ash had hardened around the bodies as they decomposed, leaving hollow spaces. By filling these spaces with plaster, Fiorelli could recreate the forms of people in their final moments. Some died huddled together. Some died running. Some died protecting children. Some died clutching their valuables. Some died in taverns. We can't say exactly what they were thinking in those final moments, but they were in taverns when they died, seeking shelter, maybe, or too scared to move, or hoping that this place that had always provided comfort would somehow protect them from the end of the world. It didn't, of course, but maybe they weren't alone. Maybe someone held their hand. Maybe the last thing they saw was a familiar face, a fellow regular, someone who knew their name. Maybe they died among friends. We've spent this whole night in Roman taverns, in the smoke and the noise, with the dice and the wine and the graffiti on the walls. We've met the workers and the customers, the criminals and the lovers, the ordinary people just trying to get through another day. What does it all mean? Here's what I think. The emperors were right to fear these places, not because of plots or conspiracies, though those existed, but because of something more fundamental. Taverns were democratic, not in the political sense. Rome was many things, but it was never a democracy. But in the tavern, at least for a few hours, the hierarchies of Roman society dissolved. The slave sat next to the freeman. The foreigner drank with the native. The woman worked alongside the men. There, it's freedom for all alike, Juvenal wrote, sneering. Shared cups. No one gets a separate couch. No table set apart. He was describing a breakdown of social order, a confusion of categories, a dangerous mixing of people who were supposed to stay separate. But from another angle, from the angle of someone who lived in a cramped apartment with no kitchen, who worked all day for barely enough to survive, who had no power over anything in their life, that mixing might have looked like something else. It might have looked like belonging. The tavern was the one place where an ordinary Roman could feel like part of a community, not the community of the state, with its obligations and hierarchies, not the community of the family, with its demands and expectations. Just a looser kind of community, the community of regulars. People who knew your name, people who'd save your seat, people who'd notice if you stopped coming. In a city of 1 million people, most of them strangers, that mattered. It still matters. The Roman tavern is gone now. Oh, you can visit the ruins. You can stand behind the counters of Pompeii and Herculaneum and imagine what it must have been like. You can read the graffiti. There are websites that have translated all of it. Every crude joke and love note and philosophical musing. But you can't order a cup of wine. You can't hear the dice rattling in the fritillus. You can't watch Iris roll her eyes at successes. You can't sit in the corner and listen to the conversations that shaped an empire from the bottom up. That world is gone. But the impulse that created it, that's still here. Every bar, every pub, every coffee shop, every diner where people gather to eat and drink and talk, they're all descendants of the popinae. Different cultures, different centuries, but the same basic human need. A place to go when home isn't enough. A third place, between work and sleep, where you can just be. The next time you're in such a place, look around. See the regulars, the ones who always take the same seat, who know the staff by name, who'd notice if you stopped coming. See the strangers, the travelers, the newcomers, the people just looking for a hot meal and a place to rest. See the worker behind the counter, the one who's been on their feet for hours, who's heard every joke and survived every difficult customer, who keeps the whole thing running through sheer will. They're not so different from the people who filled those Roman taverns 2,000 years ago. Humans haven't changed much. We still need the same things: food, drink, company, a place to belong. The Romans figured that out. They built a whole industry around it. And when the emperors tried to shut it down, the people pushed back again and again until the emperors gave up. Because you can't legislate away loneliness. You can't outlaw the need to belong. The popinae endured because it had to, and so do we. Thank you for spending this night with me, here in the smoky light of an ancient Roman tavern. I hope you found some comfort in these stories. Some sense that the people of the past weren't so different from us, that their struggles and joys and small daily victories still resonate across the centuries. If you're still awake, if you're not yet ready to drift off, know that there are more stories waiting, more nights to spend in the past. But for now, let's let the fire die down. Let's let the last customers find their way home. Let's let the tavern keeper finally rest. The dawn will come soon enough. The work will start again. The taverns will open their doors. They always do. Sleep well. And if you dream tonight, maybe you'll find yourself in a Pompeian popinae. Maybe you'll hear the dice. Maybe you'll taste the wine. Maybe you'll see the graffiti appearing on the walls, letter by letter, as someone scratches their name into eternity. Maybe you'll read a message left 2,000 years ago. We two dear men, friends forever, were here. And maybe, just for a moment, you'll know what that felt like. Good night.